Welcome, everyone. Peace and love from the Atlantean consciousness, your lighthouse of knowledge in a very dark universe. This is Grand Master Dr. Thor Templar, and I'm here to talk about a very important subject, and that's the Ouija board. It's a tool that's been around. I think everybody's either had one, used one, or has at least seen them. They've been in stores basically since the early 1960s. And talking boards, or spirit boards as they're known more in the generic term, have been around for several hundred years. And similar spirit contact tools have been around for thousands of years. And there is a variation of different tools that have been used to communicate with spirits, which is an area of great interest, obviously, to human beings because of their attachment to the physical world and the people that are in it, meaning relatives, etc. And as such, having contact with those who have passed on, who you still are directly connected with in mind, body, and spirit, is something that everyone would love to have and do, to know that their loved ones have passed and are in a happy, wonderful place. And we'll get into all these. It brings up a lot of issues when you talk about what this tool is supposed to do. It's not just a fact of a board and this and that. And it gets into a whole bunch of issues, which I'm going to cover in many, many audio lectures, because it's a very long topic to get into. And we're going to talk about Ouija boards here, Ouija boards, which is basically a combination of the French word oui for yes and the German word ja for yes. So that's where the basic word comes from, by blending those two. So there's a much bigger subject that comes up. It's even hard to talk about this because there's so many offshoots to get into this, which I'm famous for doing, that it's difficult to say centered on this. But let's go into the history of it and so forth, so people know generally the background of where things come. I find that very important in a subject matter to know, where did all this come from? What is the basis of it? It's important to know that based not just on what common use is today, what common beliefs are today, which are all just basically urban legends, because how things are used, what they were for, and everything else generally don't add up to what they originally were. So, in history, as I said, these types of tools, and, you can talk about this. Basically, this falls into a bigger subject of even divination, which is divining the future, which is generally used through contacting spirits. So it intermixes to a whole way, and of course you're asking generally questions about things in your life and readings you want of the future, etc. So oftentimes it's used as a divination tool, and some people have used this exclusively, and a lot of people see it as this, this toy that's been around since 1966, and in terms of Parker Brothers manufacturing this toy. And then, of course, in modern times, Hasbro, who now owns Parker Brothers, has been selling this board, and they've sold many, many millions of these boards. They were quite the rage in the past, and now they're quite the rage again with the two new movies that came out, which, interesting, on the Ouija board was the fact that it increased the popularity of these boards again dramatically. Sales went up over 300% in the recent years with these movies coming out, which is pretty predictable because, anytime you get publicity for something, this is what happens. So, and I believe actually Hasbro, the toy manufacturer that's producing these now, actually supported the movie in terms of investing in it, and as they've done with their G.I. Joe movies and so forth, they're in that business now, and why not? That's a great way to promote products. has pushed this, and now, as I said, there's 2 films that have done well, and sales have went through the roof on something I'm assuming is very, very cheap to manufacture. So, oftentimes these boards are called talking boards. Interesting enough, apparently and you got to remember, these are days before TV and all the fun things and even books and everything else to a certain degree, because books were expensive and a lot of people were not literate. Basically came about in the mid-1800s when spiritualism and channeling was also very big. Because there was a time when things were very, very big, and that was in the mid-1800s, where spiritualism, talking to the spirits and their mediums, all this was really a super rage. Particularly towards the end of the 1800s and getting into the early 1900s. Everybody was involved in some sort of mysticism in mystical clubs, etc. It was very much part of the culture at that particular time, and which is interesting. And, of course, it was something to do, and it was kind of a personal magic display as well. Here you're talking to things that's interesting. Things are moving around. So there's a lot of entertainers that came into that field, charlatans, which actually put together seances and did a bunch of tricks that were fooling people, thinking that they were actually communicating with their loved ones or particular dead humans. And when we talk about Ouija boards, we're generally talking about communicating with spirits that have passed, human beings that have passed. But it is not limited to that. If you start connecting with all sorts of entities have come through Ouija boards, and we don't really know. I mean, basically, in a more occult science terminology, a Ouija board is an evocational machine or tool. When you start looking at it as an evocational tool, things start to really change, other than this goofy little toy. And, that is a misnomer and a dangerous way to handle a Ouija board, as to thinking that this is some sort of play toy, that this is some sort of game. Well, Russian roulette is a game, too, and I wouldn't recommend that to many people. Some people I would. But so when you're dealing with things that start calling in random spirits, and of course you're not trying to, in most cases, call upon things that are unknown. But of course people do that, who's out there, what's going on? Oh, you just open the door to anybody who wants to come in and anything that wants to come in. If you're directing it towards a relative or so forth, then you're a little bit different, but does that mean you've made communication with? And one of the problems with using very general, unprotected tools is that if you're using them for general things, that means you're going to get general creatures, general spirits, and to coming. And if you look at the human race, all you got to do is read on the internet how nasty and rotten people are, especially when they can hide behind not looking you in the face, of how they make ridiculous comments, nasty comments, and so on. These little powerless little prune-sucking weasels that are out there that have nothing but their opinions based on their idiocy and their comic book knowledge of life, philosophy, and everything else. So, it's really sad. So what we're looking at is that basically the first type of these talking boards was Adolphus Theo Wagner, which I'm assuming was a German. First patented the Ouija board and has referred to it as talking boards in London, England, on January 23rd, 1854. So that's the first time it become very public. You got to remember, that doesn't mean that similar tools weren't used for literally 100 years before that. This is just now. There's the patent systems. You have the pretty much the formal government of London who has all these laws and other things. So this was a place to do it. And I don't know if Wagner was a Brit. Obviously, it's a German name, but he obviously did it there. In the patent, Wagner called his invention a O'Grath. And its purpose was to read the minds of people with nervous energy. So, which is very interesting if you think about that in general, that this was not really a spirit board. It was supposed to be a mind-reading tool, which is fascinating if you think about that in general. Well, here again, you have a general tool. And it can be used for all these things. And, to put this down and that you have to have some, well, I got to read some book on some evocational stuff and stand in a circle and call demons. It's the only way you can talk to people. Which some bozo idiots in this entire field think is the only way to make contact with spirits, and particularly higher spirits or other things, is, of course, nonsense. And to think that this is only for contacting spirits, it's a general tool that you can use to get information and get it in a very precise way, because it will spell things out for you. It'll give you yes and no's. Well, isn't this what tarot cards do to a certain extent? And so many other divination systems. Of course, tarot cards tend to be, and divination systems in general, tend to be elusive in the fact of giving you, quote, yes or no answers. Now, you can demand that of those systems by saying that this particular card will mean yes or no, or using a particular rune that means yes or no. And these are certainly ways you can use it, but generally, a lot of divination gets to be very interpretive, and it's meant to be like that because life isn't really that perfect. But it also, because of this, because of that factor, it means you get elusive answers. Now, with a Ouija board, you can ask specific questions and get specific answers, or at least sometimes, many times, whomever you are contacting doesn't give you specific answers either, and it turns into a typical divination session. But there's also yes and no on the board. And it's very interesting, and I've used these for years and have done everything possible not to influencing, and done it with people around me as well. And they are quite fascinating and quite amazing. And a lot of people tend to put this down in scientific fashions, when, of course, the ignorant buffoons that research these things have no science, no occult science background, so what would they know as usual? So, then what do scientists know about anything, for that matter? I'm still waiting for the cure for acne. So the whole idea is that life is uncertain, and always people are looking for methods of communicating, or just have fun talking to someone who you think is a relative or whomever, and getting information from them, and from a non-physical entity, which is quite interesting. So, but you can see that the board, again, and it's amazing how things change in life, and this is so true with so many things, when people steal ideas and change them. A prime example is taking the sun symbol, which is famous in Tibet and India, otherwise known as a swastika, and stealing it, taking the pentagram and inverting it, and then putting in so-called Baphomets. Baphomets are evil, which is not true whatsoever. The pentagram was not evil, even reversed. All these things was stated by one particular person, and somebody's added onto this and done things, and using different terminologies. The term gay, taking a word and then having that mean that you are homosexual. All these things, I personally, is a pet peeve of mine, and I don't like that whatsoever. If you're going to do things, then use a different name and trademark that in your own particular way. Don't use something that was invented for something else and then change it all around into whatever you want to use it for. So it's very interesting that this was a psychic or a mind-reading tool initially. Quite interesting when you think about that. In 1861, a Frenchman, Allan Kardec, he's a famous semi-occultist, was using the board and described it as a way to open communication with the spirit world. So he figured out how to use this a little differently. So in 7 short years, the Ouija board had evolved from a mind reader to a portal of communication with the dead. The modern boards we're using right today come from, and I think the Hasbro boards say William Fudd on it, but he's the person that basically is the classic board we all use now. But you can make your own Ouija. You can buy numerous ones online that are cool with all sorts of different things on it, other than getting the Hasbro pretty kind of boring and, in their own way, it's kind of expensive for a piece of cardboard that they want these for. You can get wooden ones, you can get ones with things that you like on it, in themes from Celtic to voodoo, you name it, you can get your own out there. And so you don't have to stick with that classic type. Hasbro has glow-in-the-dark ones now. They've got ones with electric capacities to it in terms of lighting up your pointer, and which is called a planchetta. And so, I mean, there's many variations of it, but I would, those who want to get a board, I would recommend going on eBay and look under talking boards, not just Ouija, so that you can get these varieties, and some you can get pretty inexpensively. So, and basically William Flood patented his board, and he sold his patent to Parker Brothers in 1966 at the height of all this rebirth of occultism, the fantastic golden years of occultism, which is pretty much 1966 through through and up to about 1980, and then of course there's a rebirth in the 80s to some extent, or the continuation, where witchcraft started to pick up again in the 80s, late 80s and 90s. But this was a great time when they had all that and everybody was buying, and there are books everywhere. The games that were put out, Kreskin did the ESP games, and there were several versions of this. There are all sorts of TV shows, games. I mean, there was actually a TV show, and I don't know how many people know that out there, and I just ran into this again. I remember watching it as a little whippersnapper. The Girl with Something Extra. Now, how's this about a blast from the past, people? Blast from the past with Sally Fields and John Davidson. Do people remember old John Davidson? He used to do the Hollywood Squares and was a singer. And The Girl with Something Extra, with that extra, was ESP. And I'm still trying to find episodes of this. If anybody can find episodes of this or know where I can get a hold of them, please let me know, because they have disappeared. It was only on for, I believe, 13 or 20 episodes. It was only on for 1 year, unfortunately. And but here you go, here's on national TV, people were doing that. And of course now, thanks to the satanic so-called born-again Christianis, the Churchionis, Black Lodge, frauds, and hate in their heart, people have suppressed all this stuff because it worked, and it was evolving people past the slave religion of coming to their fake temple and giving them money and them controlling you. So, God forbid that should happen. So, yeah, Martha, we can't have people thinking for themselves. They all gotta be in the womb of Jesus, so that we can beat them and take their money. And if you don't obey me, I'm gonna kill you like a good Christian I am. Because there ain't no difference between them and Islam. So the whole idea is that all these are interesting facets. So, and it's very interesting that that Ouija boards have, and apparently Parker Brother, which of course now has been bought by Hasbro. They went out of business, like so many smaller businesses. They sold 20 to 25 million boards, and that's just Hasbro in that particular period of time. So it is not counting all the modern times, the last 20, 30 years, the new resurgence. So, there could be close to 50 to 100 million of these boards easily worldwide sold. And not to mention the United States, which is easily up to 50 or 60 million of these boards sold. the So that's pretty fascinating. And of course, these things get in style just like ESP was. And of course, we lived in a very open, interesting society before the psychotic right-wing Satanists took over with the Reagan era that started in the 80s. With their Christian pablum puking nonsense, which suppressed all this stuff. So it's very interesting that all this, and it is still, as I mentioned already, a very popular game. And the game also came with, from Parker Brothers, sold all these, that heart-shaped planchetta, or planchette, depending on how you want to pronunciate. And basically, this is a pointer. It generally has its heart-shaped, slightly elongated heart. There's an opening in the center, a round circle in the center of the heart, and this then points to or goes over a particular letter. The point of the heart bottom will point to a letter or a particular word, like yes, no, goodbye. And there are numbers. All these things are there, this is placed usually. The boards are very smooth surface. The planchette has basically gliders underneath it, or what you would call, I'm trying to remember, cushions that kind of make it glide across the flat, shiny, smooth cardboard surface, which most of this is coated plastic cardboard. There's a certain coating on it, not strongly, but I mean obviously, so it moves across. Anyone who's ever used a Ouija board obviously knows. If you don't, it's hard to describe it in general. But it moves across. People put their hands on the planchette. If it's a group of people, you place the board in the center of you. Everyone puts their fingertips very lightly on the planchette, and then the spirits are supposed to move things around, using you as the actual channel to bring the energy through. I mean, theoretically, it should move by itself because the spirit could then do that. But it doesn't seem to work very well like that, even though there has been cases reported of that. Generally, you have to be involved in the process. It has to come through you, which is, like all metaphysical things, when you start doing this, this is where the scientific element tends to go out because you're too involved in the process. So regardless of how detached you think you are moving the actual planchette. So you're moving it around and making all that happen and spelling everything out. You're doing that, is what the naysayers state. Now, I disagree with that, and it's like everything else. It's like using pendulums and divination. There has to be a human interpretation and involvement in the process. Not everything's a bloody machine that you click on and do things. And pretty much those may be good for drilling holes or making screws. But when it gets into the really higher aspects of life, the actual tuning into these types of energies, other things, and need to involve the human consciousness. And a lot of that, quite frankly, is because regular science doesn't want to give you sensitive things, which more and more is coming out that there is actual meters and everything else that can measure all these occult energy fields and spirit fields, are all available out there. They just really haven't been perfected very well, etc. Because that gets into a whole nother can of worms with the suppression of consciousness technology and those who are involved in it. And so Parker Brothers, I don't know when they sold out to Hasbro, but Parker Brothers marketed the Ouija board under the tagline of "It's only a game." Is it? So, and obviously that was a marketing tool, but I mean, I think it's also a very poignant of what is going on here. And of course that was part of it, and I don't think people quite understand that, these really are tools for connecting with the afterlife, or connecting with spirits of a variety amounts. And what people don't understand is that, as in life, there's all sorts of shit hanging around. There's good things, there's bad things, there's liars, there's maniacs, there's psychos. And why should that, particularly if you're communicating with past humans who are very demonic in nature to begin with, and you start contacting them again using some sort of board, why would you think that you're not going to get in contact with these types of deviants? So, once you open up these realms, this kind of automatic writing, and this is you can draw into anything. But of course, this is a type of automatic writing. And automatic writing is something where you can sit down and do the same thing. Call on a spirit, and they will then, through automatic writing, tell you what to write. So this is all part of this same concept, and this goes back, automatic writing, of course, goes back to records in China of 1100 AD. There are several methods like this, and of course, the talking board was just an easier way to do it, and than actually writing, and to a large extent, you have less control over when you use a board. So when you're writing something physically and letting something come through you and write, instead of move something, you tend to get more of a channeled situation. But everything is channeled to some degree. But it became very popular in America during the spiritualist movement, as we mentioned, in surpassing automatic writing because of the ease of it and because everybody could do this, unlike automatic writers, which had to be basically a channel. To get back into the history a little, we talked about flood and other things. I found a little more detailed information on it, which I think details it better. Businessman Elijah Bond had the idea to patent a planchette sold with a board which the alphabet was printed on. Much like the previous existing talking boards, he filed for a patent May 28, 1890. And he is the original inventor of the board. There's other people, as we've just mentioned, that have come into this. This is a typical thing of what happened. But Elijah Bond was an attorney, and he invented all sorts of things and produced these things, very typical of that particular time. An employee of his was William Fudd, as we just talked about, took over the talking board production in 1901, and he started to produce his own boards under the name Ouija. Charles Kennard, founder of Kennard Novelty Company, which manufactured Flood's talking boards, and where Flood had worked actually as an employee there, claimed he named the Ouija from using the board, and that it was an ancient Egyptian word for good luck, which we cannot verify whatsoever. When Flood took over production of the board, he popularized the more widely accepted term that it came from the French and German for yes. So there's a little extra information there. Flood name would become synonymous with the Ouija board as... So it's always interesting. It's interesting the minute you get people involved. Flood would become synonymous with the Ouija board as Flood reinvented its history, claiming that he himself had invented it. The strange talk about boards from Flood's competitors and flooded the market with all sorts of boards and of different types, and was very popular from the 1920s to the 1960s. Flood sued many companies over the Ouija name and concept right up to his death in 1927. In 1966, Flood's estate sold the entire business to Parker Brothers, which was sold to Hasbro in 1991. Okay, so then we get the date there, that 1991, Hasbro took it over. The entire Parker Brothers business, who were very famous for making the board games, which I guess a younger person I spoke to not too long ago had never heard of board games. And Hasbro now, of course, owns the trademarks and patents. And there's apparently about 10 different major companies making boards, even though I find that hard to believe. I haven't really seen that, but anybody can make a talking board. It just can't be exactly like it. I mean, there's many different types, as I said, with many different graphics and interest in it, and the Hasbro boards are pretty boring. Now, to cover the scientists and basic understanding, they consider all these types of things, including pendulums, to be the ideomotor response is the technical term, which means you unconsciously are making muscle movements that make a pendulum move or make the Ouija board planchette move to where it to letters, etc. So various studies have been produced recreating the effects of the Ouija board in the lab and showing that under laboratory conditions the subjects were moving the planchettes involuntarily. Skeptics have described Ouija boards as operators. Some critics noted that the messages ostensibly spelled out by spirits were similar to whatever was going on in the minds of the subjects, according to Professor of Neurology Terence Hines in his book Pseudo-Science and the Paranormal. He stated that the planchette is guided by unconscious muscle exertions like those responsible for table movements. Nevertheless, in both cases, the illusion that the object, table, or planchette is moving under its own control is often extremely powerful and significant, and many people that are feel that this is a true experience. The unconscious muscle movements responsible for moving tables and Ouija boards and Ouija board phenomena seen at seances, an example of the classics do what psychologists call a dissociative state. A dissociative state is one in which the consciousness is somehow divided or cut off from the aspects of the individual's sensory functions. So what they're saying is that, this is just as usual with everything else. It's all in your head, then nothing's happening. And of course, why you're moving your muscles to these particular areas and spelling out these particular things is just because, that's what you're into, dude. Well, if that was the case, I guess all the boards would spell out beer, porn, and pizza, and not exactly what I've heard most people spell out. But, in the 1970s, Ouija board users were also described as cult members by psychologists. Got to remember, all occultists are crazy. We're as crazy as the gate, and that's what they all say. Except that occult science is the science that the scientists really follow, but these scientists don't even know that. The underlying essence of life in quantum physics is basically just the restating of occult science principles. So there was a famous, and you can see this if you want to see an interesting, on Brain Games. This is a particular series on cable TV. I'm not sure what network it's on. National Geographic. That's a very cool show in general. It shows human perception. Shows that the boards didn't work when people were blindfolded, and they turned the boards upside down, and they put one hand in water, and they slapped them in the face with a fish. All these type of things. Well, of course, it didn't work. But the fact that boards should work if you're blindfolded, again, means nothing. It's coming through you. And so this is all very subjective, scientific, mishy-mashy garbage. As I said, I think they should stick to the fields they really know well. Nothing. Or should I say the fire factor, which all science is based on, because everything's based on burning with them. But that's a whole nother lecture I think I've done already. But before I... So, it's very interesting that... that this is the typical scientific response to it, but the point is that good and bad information come through all divination, and the user is unfortunately still a major part of this type of technology, as it is with all the occult sciences. And of course, I'm trying to bring that down to a scientific basis where you do X, X, and X, and you get a certain amount of results, and the user tends to become secondary. But everything in life is really based on how well. Masters of anything are based on an individual who's able to somehow master the energy fields or draw in the perfect energy fields contained within that avenue of study, which we call streams, and based on natural abilities, meaning if you're going to be a good basketball player, being close to 7 foot helps a hell of a lot, even though there are great basketball players that are under that as well. But I mean, that's some of the natural abilities, but why does a team of, let's say, all 7 foot people and some players play better than others? And this is because some people are able to channel in or adapt to the energies that are there to perform at higher levels. Yet, scientifically, that doesn't make sense. You're all humans. You all have the same coach. You all do the same thing. So, scientists are wrong again. But all divination has that particular problem, which is why it tends to be criticized. But all science has that same problem as well, because they don't answer anything, but they put it in numbers, and we have this giant board. And of course, we get geniuses like Einstein, who is a theoretical physicist, meaning I sit around and think of things, and I think water is wet, and if you put water real fast through a wall, you get energy. Or mass, energy equals this. Oh yeah, things can't go because you'd have to burn the universe to go faster than the speed of light, and there's just not enough energy. Well, it's all been proven to be nonsensical bull. And while I always find Einstein a charming little horny bastard that he was, all his theories are crapola. And we all know tachyon, or faster-than-light energies, exist and have been proven to by the same scientists. And of course, they were proven even back then, but people liked the horny little man called Einstein. So, needless to say, its mass availability, its inexpensive cost, has attracted many people. But ultimately, as it first started off by the original inventor, which was not Flood, it was the person who I spoke about, and it was used for a different purpose, and it was more of a divination tool or a mind-reading tool. And it's always been as a divination tool in general, and the spirit aspects of it is what everybody's fascinated by spirits, and as I said, everybody wants to communicate with past ones, past people, get information. After all, it's free, it's cheap, it's fun, and it's all there for anyone to experiment with. So it caught on, and it's been around, and I assume that it will be around for hundreds of years to come. And it's been used by all sorts of people and all sorts of uses for many years. And there are hundreds of people have used it to get information, which they claim is real, from anything from demons to angels to God to extraterrestrials, and to get prophecies from, as some people have done, and with a huge variance of success and credibility. As usual with most divinations by most people, when it really comes down to it, it is a very poor tool because of the basic corruptness of the individual who wants to lead things to their own belief systems and monetary factors. So the whole idea of you selling the world is coming to an end is very profitable, and so people will write all these kind of prophecies they get from Ouija boards and other things. And Ouija boards tend to be laughed at the most, and like tarot cards are so much better. You're dealing with the same types of energies here, and so it all really depends on so many things, as I just demonstrated here. It's very much dependent upon the operator. So those people who excel at a sport, that have the same coaches, the same physical, everything, excel because of their natural abilities, and the same thing in the occult world. There are people who are good at these things, people who are bad at it, and there's an egotistical problem which happens with people, and I find that this happens with most occultists. They think that everything they have is 100% right, and Once they get a few things right, they think everything that comes out is perfect, and this is where we start to get into problems, even with people who apparently, and I haven't studied it intimately, like Edgar Cayce supposedly did all these cures, got all these things right, predicted the Depression. Did not get right that California was going to break open in 1968 by a huge earthquake at the San Andreas Fault. So he was very wrong there, and it's still going 40 years later. It has not happened. So a lot of things are wrong as well. How much is right, how much is wrong? Just like psychics, if you make 100 predictions, a few of those are going to come out correct. So what you do then is you throw out 98 predictions you made, and then you take out, see, I was right, these two here. Well, again here, that's the kind of fraudulent type of things that people do, and they get caught up in these things because it becomes a business with them, and they have to support themselves with it. Earth change maps, they had these maps which showed how the earth would change, and these were huge sellers as promoted on shows like Art Bell. I think the person's name was Tori or whatever. But the whole idea is that they pushed these warming maps after that, because then they found out that that wasn't going to happen. So, well, when the earth rises, the water levels, etc. So, and sold a bunch of these because it is fascinating. Well, this may happen, that may happen. What's going on with the earth changes? And, of course, it was all pretty much incorrect, except, of course, if the water levels do rise, and as has been predicted at the level it is, because the ice caps are all melting, there will be massive amounts of land lost all over the world, because, pretty much all the world borders the ocean in one way or another. So it's not very difficult to predict those types of things, and pretty much that can be gotten from average science. So, it's a fascinating and fun tool, but, the problem is that, is it valid? How to use it properly? And, I'm going to put out a particular book on this, or booklet on this, with a particular sigil so you can use it safely in the future sometime, when, I don't know. But, it is a fascinating tool, and there's no reason why a person shouldn't particularly use this if you use it correctly, and you must do that, because there are elements to the Ouija board that is really problematical and very dangerous. Now, I've used Ouija boards for quite a long time, and I've had problems every time I haven't done formal protection and sealing exercises. The minute you allow any energy, any hanging around energy to contact you, you get all sorts of problems. And generally, positive spirits and positive people are not hanging around you as much, or even though they are there to be contacted, as much as trickster, evil, vampiric spirits are there because they want to come in. They're the troublemakers. They're there, they're Johnny on the spot, and boom. Now, we have to understand, I'm not going to go into it too much here because it is very complicated unto itself, and probably is an hour lecture just unto itself of what the spirit world is that is hanging around there. But let me talk about that in general. And so the whole idea is that all human essence, anything that's been alive in your dimensional plane at this time, meaning your life, earth, physical reality, is made up of several different energies. Part of those energies are permanently connected to this reality. Animals, trees, plants, they're there. This is why when somebody takes a Kirlian photography of something, a Kirlian photography checks energy fields, and you break, let's say you take a leaf and you cut part of the leaf off. When you use Kirlian photography, it shows the whole leaf because that energy is still being projected there, and it's a permanent facet of what's there. So when you move on, and it gets into a whole bunch of things of what this reality is or not, but during the reincarnation recycling process that everyone goes through except those who are on higher levels and ascend out of it, you are leaving a particular amount of your essence in that reality in that time. And it's just as simple as that. So everybody who has ever passed, these energies are all there and all in those particular environments. And if you lived in a place for a long time, your energies are there, and that's the reality of it, even if you haven't been dead. And there has been actually time cameras of advanced technologies that actually can take pictures when tuned into certain errors or times or dates, and will get photographs of what was happening at that particular place at that particular time. So these energies are always there. The whole idea is, this is another reason why we're not all Harry Potters and can sense everything, and those people that can get very disturbed by it because of the fact that these things are blocked out from your day-to-day consciousness, and you're not tuned into them because you're living similar to the world. You're living in a more physical world in terms of the fact that, I don't know if people understand it, but, if you can get a radio signal, or your internet works, or your phone works, wherever you are, from a little device, what does that mean? Well, that means that all these waves, these energy forms, these are there bombarding you constantly. So all these energies are in the air that we're producing all these by the billions every day. So every single radio signal, every single phone signal is all hitting you whether you want it or not. So you're living in this, and it doesn't bother you because these fields generally you don't detect unless you're using a particular type of device. Now, the only way to seal yourself off from all that stuff is to get in what's called a Faraday cage, which nullifies all these frequencies from affecting you. But they're all there, and you don't feel them, you don't pay attention to them, you have nothing to do with them, unless, as I said, you're using a particular device, and then these fields are brought in specifically to you, and you're used in a conscious state. But if you felt every single television show, radio show, frequency, phone, everything else was around you, you'd go insane. And it's the same thing if you sensed every spiritual thing. And that's the problem with people who are overly sensitive, is they tend to draw these into one extreme to the other. And if you draw them in all the time very potently, you are labeled as a schizophrenic, someone who's hearing voices and other things. So we don't know how much of this is just somebody who's just overly sensitive and basically has been driven mad by the constant voices that they're hearing. So there are different levels of this, and then of course we don't know if they're actually demons have connected to them or not. So people who do destructive things could have demons telling them doing it, which we think, oh, that's all craziness. Well, it could be really true, and because these energies are there. So it's a complicated thing. So the point is all these spirits are there from all of time in your particular location. People that you know, relatives, etc., are all connected to you in this giant energetic family of spirits that are hanging around you all the time. Now, whether they want to talk with you, whether they want to communicate with you is a whole nother issue, but they're there and oftentimes can be communicated with. So while all your buddies and pals are there, so are all sorts of trickster, liars, and we're not sure if they're demons directly, but there seems to be demons as well, which are basically evil, destructive spirits. And if that's the case, then there's God forms, then there's everything else there as well. So everything is potentially around you and there to tune into. And, the reason why some people are good at certain things is they just have this natural ability to do it. So a person who's a medium just has this natural ability for whatever reason. Of course, science refuses to research these areas to find out what it is, because we should be able to turn that on and off in people very easily, because if one person has it, somebody else should have it as well. And pretty much everybody who is a medium or has a skill all says the same thing. They really didn't develop it as we teach in the occult sciences to a large degree. It was there, so they think that everybody has it within them, and I don't think that's the case whatsoever. Those natural abilities are to reach high levels of anything are individualistic. While everybody does have the capacity to, let's say, use a Ouija board to a decent level, there's always going to be somebody who can use it as a much higher tool and get much better information. That's the fact of life. Everybody's better. Some people drive better than others. Some people know how to cook better than others. Some people do whatever better than others. That's the way of the world. So, and it has nothing to do with occultism. And why are some people cook better than others? Why are there master chefs and there are chefs? It's important for people to understand that, because that's more scientific nonsense. Oh, it has no credibility because we can't get the same results. Well, that's, of course, complete and total nonsense. So all these energies around you. So what do you do there? You're in this giant thing, and you just, we'll just take it. It's a fun game. We've had a few drinks. Boom. And so all these energies are out there. And people tend to be very unspecific, and they start just calling spirits. And who do you think comes through? I mean, smarter, more divine spirits are not all that interested in talking to some drunk idiot and his pals who are doing some joyriding. But that negative, evil, vampiric spirit is more than happy to join the party. Hey, I'd like to get some of that drink too. So these people are pulled in very, very easily when you're doing it in a raw state such as this. So that's very critical to understand that all this is around you. And if you do things very sloppily like this, you leave yourself open to potential problems. And what's interesting is these spirits seem to be connected to you wherever you go and whatever time of life in. So if you connect to a particular entity, you've opened a stream or contact to that energy. And if you do that at 12 and you then use a Ouija board at 75, guess who pops up? And we've proven this time and time again. So coming to the end of part 1 here, we will pick this up in part 2.